So before we, oh wait, it's currently recording. Alrighty, can you see the screen all right?
Yes.
Perfect. Alrighty, so welcome to this presentation I've put together on pulling a Bob Moritz, or how to broadcast and record guest lectures using Zoom. And I'll get to that one in just a moment, why we called it a Bob Moritz there, but it's going to be, I figured to put this together just in case if anyone else has like any other type of VIP type guests that need to be shown in from a remote perspective. So, a little bit of background to get to this there. Back in early to mid 2020, that was right when we started doing social distancing and having to work remotely, put everything up on Zoom there. The School of Business had invited Bob Moritz to give his usual yearly talk to the School of Business students over inside one of their classes there. And usually Bob Moritz likes to do this in person, either inside like an auditorium or within a classroom setting itself there. Thing is that we are expecting an influx of member audiences, probably between 100 to 300 people to attend, including quite a few VIPs, such as the provost as well as the president there. And we were expecting to not only do this for Bob Moritz himself, but also other VIP guests that come on, which ended up happening when we had Bill Testa as well as repeated appearances of Bob Moritz coming up on to campus. So what do we do in this sense? Well, we figured to use Zoom for this one, and at the end, a little bit of a spoiler, Zoom, we did use Zoom and it did end up coming up all right, but there were a lot of externalities, a lot of variables where this could have gone wrong. And during our early days of starting off, there were a lot of things that went wrong initially that we've had to plan out for. So to cut to the chase, there was a lot of high-level planning that needed to be done in order to be able to pull off a guest speaker series on Zoom over at the School of Business. Teamwork was a big component because this was not something that could be done by just one person. We needed multiple other people involved in order to help make sure that the process was streamlined. Technical was a moderate part of it too. Obviously, you have to not only have Zoom, but also a good enough computer as well as enough storage to be able to deal with recording should you decide to want to record. There's a code of conduct you have to put together because nowadays with Zoom, you have a lot of bad actors that sometimes like to ruin the experience. A lot of Zoom bombers, or not even bad actors, sometimes just like inadvertent people that just join on that don't have their mics muted, or like just common mistakes that can ruin the whole event. And finally, there's a little bit of like a scripting and scheduling component to it, because I'll get to this one in just a moment, but the long story short is that when you go to do a Zoom guest lecture series, it doesn't really translate well from like an in-person series over to a remote type of setting there. It's almost kind of like putting together a live TV show in front of an audience, if you will. Oh, whoops. Here we are. So just a brief overview of where some of this stuff went wrong. I've left this, but this is just a general of like what went wrong during the series that we've kind of locked upon and learned off of afterwards. So one of them was we had an attendee that joined mid-event there, and we didn't have the setting for the meeting to mute everyone upon joining or turn their cameras off. So immediately after they joined, the first thing we heard mid-talk when Bob was giving his talk was, "Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can anyone hear me?" Which was just very unprofessional. Another event, we had some attendees, some students that decided to kind of get a little controversial in their line of questioning, kind of bordering on not safe for work type of wording inside the chat box. So we had to immediately enact moderation in order to make sure that that didn't really ruin the experience afterwards. Going back over to another similar event, which goes back to why we had to make sure that the mute attendees upon joining was enabled, was we had too much ambient noise that started creeping in. And so we've had to keep asking people to mute their mics, and it would cause like certain types of feedback with the user, which just ruined the audio quality at the very end. And when we started getting additional guests, there was like this game that we had to play once the event started, where sometimes like the dean or like one of the other attendee hosts were saying, "Where's the guests? Our guests should be coming here any moment." Bob, Bill, are you guys here? Like that whole game of identifying which one was which. And I'll get to that one in just a moment there on how to reduce that. So the big part is teamwork. When you host a guest speaker, like I mentioned earlier, you want to kind of think of it like producing a live TV show. In that sense, you want to kind of delegate certain roles to other people on a team so that way they can help make this process a little bit more streamlined. So you have your showrunner, or rather the director of the show, who's going to kind of work with that guest in order to plan like an itinerary, a schedule with them, and make sure that they know like when they're going to be joining on, when they're going to be giving their talk, and when to expect like doing questions and answers, or to help like make the higher level event plan so that way the show kind of goes as planned and there's no unnecessary or unforeseen consequences that do happen. You're going to have your host or master of ceremonies, who's going to be like the main face, the main voice of the show, who's going to introduce the guest speaker and kind of move the flow of the show. So they'll be the person that will be like, "Hey, here's our guest, and now we're going to move on to the line of questions." You're going to have your moderators. So these are kind of more like the security guards, if you will. They're going to monitor the chat functions as well as the attendees and make sure there's like no type of controversial questioning or any type of comments that might ruin the event there. And they're the ones that will read off the questions towards the end, so that way they can make sure that the timing is still kept on site. And they will also notify the Zoom host, whoever is controlling the Zoom account there, of troublesome audience members, so that way the host can be able to boot them right out of the meeting afterwards. Which segues into the control booth person. This is the most important role because the control booth operator is going to be the one that actually controls the Zoom session. They're going to have the account that has any type of augmented add-ons, so like large meeting add-ons. They're the ones that are also going to administer the waiting room, so letting people inside the room, and they're the ones that have the power to remotely mute or remove troublesome audience members if they decide to get a little too rowdy inside the session there. This person is also going to be working behind the scenes. So they're the ones that are going to work on like the technical aspects. So making sure that like the video feed comes on through, making sure that the audio feed comes in clearly from the guests, as well as like certain other VIPs. And basically this is going to be the more technical aspect of the role. And finally, if you record your event that you want to show later, I highly recommend getting an editor, someone who's good with video editing, because if your event's going to be about an hour or so, you're probably going to be bound to have like maybe some bits and pieces that are going to be like not too smooth, like either the audio has cut out or like someone accidentally joins on and says, "Hello, can you hear me?" in the middle of a talk. So you'll want someone to kind of edit that out. And I forgot to add another piece to this, but the editor will also optionally work on like a subtitles or caption piece to it. So that way people with disabilities, if they're hard of hearing and need to see what they're talking about, then they'll be able to read the subtitles afterwards. When it comes to the technical prep, the control booth user is going to do a little bit of prep on their end. They're the ones that have the Zoom account that have the max attendance on their end. So they have to confirm that the amount of people that are going to be attending their session has like the capacity to fulfill that. The control booth user is also going to need reliable internet access as well as computer equipment, because if that computer equipment like dies out inside the middle of a session there, it won't necessarily take the entire session down, especially if there's alternative hosts that are set for it, but it will just kind of like throw everything out of whack, to say the least there. Having said that, a webcam is kind of optional for the control booth user, because they're the ones that are going to be kind of be working inside the background and making sure that stuff kind of goes through. They're going to be kind of looking at the feed to make sure that the guest comes on through properly, as well as like VIPs can talk and all that. I would also recommend that they have 2 Zoom accounts. One of them is the one that's going to be running the session from. Another is going to be a guest account. So that way they can be able to use that on an iPad as a secondary viewpoint, just as kind of a test user, just to make sure that the feed comes in on their end. And I stress the guest account part because what we've learned through this session when we set up the the Zoom sessions is that we can't really be logged into more than one place at a time for an event like this, because Zoom has this kind of frankly nasty feature where it'll log you out of like your previous session and kind of throw your previous meetings out of whack if you try and go to another meeting within the same account. So I recommend having another guest account set up just to make sure that the meeting goes through smoothly. All roles that are going to be involved with the production of the guest event, I recommend that they all use computers, be it a Mac or a PC there. I don't recommend that they have cell phones or tablets to use because I've seen some usability issues with moderators trying to moderate the event and having to go through different menus, whereas they're more comfortable using the PC and being quickly to get a hold of the controls to send out messages saying like, hey, we have a troublesome person inside their control booth, boot them out. When it comes to communication, on the other hand, I recommend that there's a secondary form of communication that's set. So having like cell phones or like an external chat, be it like Slack or Google Chat set up on the side. So that way amongst like the team, the production team, be it the moderators or the host, they can be able to like quickly send a message out saying, hey, we've got a problem here and there. I don't recommend using the internal Zoom chat for this one, even if it's like a private feature, because if you do that, that's going to cause some usability issues with some of the other team members where they might accidentally push out a public message to everyone saying, hey, we got a problem on screen Y, please fix it there. And it's just kind of a little unprofessional for the whole audience to see, to say the least. If you're going to be recording the event, I recommend having it go to cloud during the entire event. So that way should you have equipment issues from the control booth operators end, then it will, the recording will at least still like go on at the very least, or if it cuts out in the middle, then you'll have it like right available inside the cloud there. If it's being locally recorded on a computer and it ends up like dying out there, you might only have a partial feed, or even the hard drive might end up dying and you won't be able to get the feedback afterwards. And finally, if there's going to be a PowerPoint involved from the guest, you'll definitely want to kind of touch base with them just to kind of make sure that they know like how to put that up, as well as like making sure that they know who's going to be like sharing the slides as well as controlling it. With Bob Moritz in particular, he had an administrative assistant with him that would operate the PowerPoint slides. So what we ended up having to do was sharing her screen up to the main area there, while Bob was pinned onto the speaker series. So that way he would continue talking and you could see his face while the PowerPoint was the main area of his. I recommend having a code of conduct established for your audience as well, especially if it's a departmental thing, because you can get into a little bit of a hairy situation with some staff members or faculty sometimes when they join on to the series. I recommend, if you're going to set up a code of conduct policy, have it set so that way everyone except guests as well as VIPs are muted. So when I mention VIPs, say for instance, like the president or the provost joins on for that matter, you would want to kind of think twice about muting them. In fact, you want to kind of laser focus to make sure that they're all right and making sure that like their audio comes in properly in case they want to give like a keynote speech there. But segueing on to the next side there, anyone who is not a VIP, who's a regular attendee there, I would probably just make sure that they know that if they break mute for like any non-reason, like if they basically break mute without authorization, or they don't have like the permission to talk or anything like that, you may want to have a policy to have them either removed or give them a warning of such, so that way they can kind of make sure that they're controlled, to say the least. If you're going to be recording, you'll surely want to have like some type of disclaimer, so that way people will know that it's being recorded, so that way they don't accidentally like make too much of a ruckus or like cause any type of issues with information being displayed out. Having said that, also make sure you have a release form signed by the guest too, because I know with videos, it kind of gets into like a hairy territory of like, if you display it publicly, like whose rights are allowed to it and all that fun stuff. It's kind of circling back over to the baseline of removals there. In addition to breaking mutes, you may also want to make sure you lock down like what your baseline is for removing people from your Zoom session. So if anyone is like doing controversial statements in the chat or just harassing or trolling people or using profanity there, you may want to kind of use that as kind of like your, hey, this guy's out of here, like boot them out control booth, like use that as kind of like your baseline to remove them. And last but not least, make sure you establish what your max capacity is inside your meeting there. Just know that whoever is part of your production team, as well as the guest, is a part of that max cap. So if you have like, say, a 300 max cap for your Zoom account there, and you want to hold like an event there, you may want to have your actual max event like cut off at like no more than 250 or 275 there, just to make sure that all the other VIPs, as well as like people involved with the production, actually make it into the room. Otherwise, if you have that cap on that room and like you go like overboard, then you might have some issues down the road with that. Now, when it comes to scripting and scheduling, it works a lot best if both the guest as well as the production team have like kind of a, I wouldn't say like a full-on script, but like a little bit of like a pointer of like how the flow of the show is going to be going. I would definitely lock down if whether or not they're going to be doing a PowerPoint or if they're going to be like straight talk, like kind of like semi-formal or informal in that sense there. You definitely want to put together an itinerary so you kind of keep the event focused, organized, and scheduled there, and try and keep it to about 1 hour if possible, especially if you're going to be recording, so that way it makes it a little bit easier to edit the final video afterwards. On the right, I have a little bit of like an example itinerary that you could use for like an event, but this is like highly variable. Like it's dependent on what the event is and how you want to set it up. So for instance, like you can have like an event going from 2:30 to 4. You can spend the first 5 minutes having the master of ceremonies introduce guests and VIPs. And then right afterwards, you'll have like someone like the dean or the president give like a little foreword, like talking about like the guests themselves or like how they're honored and stuff. And then after that, you'd have the guests give their little spiel and their presentation for like almost an hour or so, and then leave some time right towards the end. In this instance, we've had like 30 minutes kind of set up for that, just so that way you can open the floor for questioning, which is where moderation is also going to come into play, because you want to make sure you kind of reduce on like trolling or like any type of questions that might kind of break the flow. And finally, just some extra tips that are like just outside of those general areas. Circling back to what I mentioned is make sure your guests, like their technology setup is kind of set up in that way. When we first early started out, we had a guest come on that was using an iPad, but their name wasn't showing up inside Zoom afterwards, which kind of fits into that whole 4-minute game of, hey, are you there? Are you still there? Can you hear us? We don't see you. And their iPad was just kind of showing up with the name iPad on the bottom right. So we didn't know if that was the actual guest itself. You'll want to use the waiting room function just to make sure that like guests are kind of controlled, to say the least, so that way you don't accidentally like let in people that are like not authorized, or like if you have someone that comes onto the room with like the name Darth Vader or anything like that, you don't want that to happen. I can't stress this third bullet point enough. Do a practice run. Do as many practice runs as you can, just to kind of walk through the steps, just to make sure that like the meeting will go like flow wise, as well as like making sure like you lock down any type of externalities that could possibly affect the meeting there. When you go to advertise the event, you'll want to make sure that like your URL is like finalized, like set, because if you advertise that out, for the event, and then next thing you know, you have to like change a setting or create like a new URL. That's just going to cause a little bit of panic and confusion with whoever's doing the marketing for the event. So you'll want to kind of lock that URL down, or at least like make sure you have a firm enough URL so that way people can join it and they don't play the game of like, am I at the right place? Is this the right Zoom meeting to be? And if you're authorized to record and have your video public, I found it best to upload to YouTube, at least like using our instance of YouTube. So that way you can use the auto caption tools to generate the captions and make it easier for accessibility down the road, as well as being able to have that storage from YouTube. So that way you can be able to easily share the video out or make the sharing granular. So you can either have it unlisted or private within a small group of subjects. And that's pretty much all I currently have. Let me just go ahead and stop sharing there. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts at the moment?
I was just going to say thanks. You provide a lot of really detailed information that I really hadn't thought of.
My pleasure. I will say, like, I want to get this information out there as much as possible in case someone else wanted to have an event similar to this, because it was a lot of trial and error, to say the least. So happy to help out whenever I can. So in case anyone else wants to like have an event similar, then they'll be able to kind of learn from what we did back then.
Very good. Thank you.
Anytime. So I think that's pretty much all I currently have for that. I'll put in my email address inside the chat in case if anyone has any like other questions about the like setting up a similar event or like any other types of pointers that they might need if they wanted to host a VIP series off of Zoom.
Okay, thank you. I'll stop the recording.
All righty.